The station never slept. Even in the deep hours of the night cycle, when most of the crew had retreated to their bunks and the overhead lights dimmed to a soft blue glow, Waypoint Station Kairos hummed with quiet life. Cooling systems breathed through the vents. Cargo loaders clicked and settled on their tracks. The distant engines of docked ships groaned softly like sleeping animals. Sergeant Eli Voss had learned to love those sounds. He had been stationed on Kairos for 3 years now, longer than most human staff ever stayed. Other people requested transfers after 12 months, complaining about the isolation, the cold recycled air, the strange alien traders who passed through without ever learning a single word of English. But Eli never put in a transfer request. He liked the quiet. He liked the routine. He liked knowing exactly what every sound meant. That was why, on a Tuesday night in the 14th month of his second tour, he stopped walking. He was on his way back from the mess hall, carrying a thermos of black coffee and a data pad he needed to finish reviewing before morning. The lower deck corridor was empty. The lights were at 30%. His boots made soft, steady sounds on the metal floor. And then he heard something else. It was faint. Almost nothing. A small, thin sound that did not belong to any machine or pipe or engine he had ever learned. It was high-pitched and broken, like something trying very hard to call out but not having the strength to do it properly. It stopped. Then it came again. Then 2 more sounds joined it, slightly different in pitch, weaker than the first. Eli stood completely still. He had worked cargo long enough to know that strange sounds on a lower deck were rarely good news. Loose panels, pressure leaks, electrical faults, those were the usual explanations. He should have called it in. Should have logged it and let maintenance handle it in the morning. Instead he followed it. The sound was coming from Bay 17. It was one of the old storage bays that had been taken off the active rotation 8 months ago after a pressure calibration issue. Nobody used it anymore. The door was supposed to be sealed. It was not sealed. The door was closed, but the lock panel was dark, which meant the seal had been manually disengaged from the inside at some point. Eli stared at that dark panel for a moment. He set his thermos down on the floor. Then he pressed his hand flat against the door, pushed it slowly and stepped inside. The bay was large and almost completely dark. The only light came from a strip of emergency floor lighting along the far wall, casting a dim orange glow across the ground. The space was full of old cargo frames, empty storage containers stacked in uneven towers, and the general clutter of equipment that stations always accumulated and never quite got around to throwing away. The sounds were louder now. Eli moved carefully, stepping around a fallen container frame, ducking under a low shelf unit. He followed the sound toward the back left corner of the bay, where several large cargo containers had been pushed together into a rough cluster. The orange emergency light barely reached that far. He stopped at the edge of the cluster and looked around the side of the largest container. There were 3 of them. He had seen Draconi before. The station traded regularly with Draconi merchant vessels, and their crew members came aboard every few weeks to process shipments and review cargo manifests. Adult Draconi were impossible to miss, large, scaled, with thick necks and heavy ridged brows and eyes that caught light like polished amber. They moved through the station corridors and made everyone nearby feel slightly smaller than usual. These were not adults. These were hatchlings. Young ones. Small enough that the largest of the 3 would have barely reached Eli's knee if it stood upright. Their scales were soft-looking, not yet hardened into the thick armor plating of a grown Draconi. The colors were pale, a dusty gray-green on the largest, a lighter sand color on the middle one, and an almost silver-white on the smallest. Their wings were folded tight against their backs, thin and delicate, the membrane nearly translucent. They were pressed together in the corner and they were going through the garbage. Not metaphorically. Literally. Someone, probably dock workers, had left a collection of discarded food containers near the back of the bay at some point, the kind of thing that accumulated in unused spaces when disposal schedules slipped. Protein bar wrappers. Empty meal trays. A cracked container that had held grain paste, now mostly dried out. The 3 hatchlings were scraping at these containers with small clawed hands, licking at the dried remnants, pushing the wrappers around with their snouts, making those thin, broken sounds with every breath. They were starving. Eli did not move for a long moment. He just looked at them. The largest hatchling was working at the grain paste container with focused desperation, dragging its small tongue along the inside edge over and over even though there was almost nothing left. The middle one had found a protein bar wrapper and was chewing on the corner of it, not eating the wrapper itself but trying to get at whatever trace flavor was left on the inside surface. The smallest one was not even trying anymore. It was sitting slightly apart from the other 2, its head low, its sides moving with slow and shallow breaths. That one worried him. He must have made a sound without realizing it, or maybe they simply sensed him. The largest hatchling snapped its head up first. Its amber eyes fixed on Eli and it made a sharp hissing sound, a warning. The middle one scrambled back against the wall. The smallest one lifted its head slowly and looked at him with eyes that were glassy and unfocused. Eli raised both his hands slowly, palms out. He did not speak. He did not move forward. He just held his hands up where they could see them and stayed completely still. The largest hatchling kept its eyes locked on him and hissed again, quieter this time. Its small chest was heaving. It was terrified, but it was also positioning itself slightly in front of the other two, protecting them. Eli noticed that and felt something tighten in his chest. He lowered himself slowly into a crouch, making himself smaller. The hissing stopped. The three hatchlings watched him. He watched them. Nobody moved. Then Eli straightened up carefully, turned around and walked out of the bay. He moved quickly but quietly down the corridor back to the mess hall. The night cycle staff barely looked up when he came in. He went to the food storage area, found a container of soft protein mix that was easy to digest, added a portion of grain broth, picked up a clean tray and walked back out. He grabbed his thermos from the floor where he had left it and went back to Bay 17. He pushed the door open again and stepped inside. The hatchlings were still there. They had not run. The largest one raised its head and made a low sound when it saw him come back in, less sharp than before, more cautious. Eli crouched down at a distance. He set the tray on the floor. He pushed it forward slowly, just a short distance, and then pulled his hands back. The smell reached them before anything else. The middle hatchling's head came up. Its nostrils flared. It looked at the tray. It looked at Eli. It looked at the tray again. The largest one made a quiet sound, something low and clicking, and the middle one hesitated. But the smallest one was already moving. Slowly, unsteadily, it pulled itself up onto all four limbs and walked toward the tray in a crooked little line, like it was not entirely sure its legs would hold. It reached the edge of the tray, dropped its head and began to eat. Something about watching that small silver-white creature eat with such exhausted relief made Eli sit down right there on the cold floor of the dark cargo bay, in the middle of his shift, and just stay. The other two followed after another moment. All three of them ate without looking up, pressing close together over the tray, making small sounds between bites. Not the broken desperate sounds from before, but something softer. Something that was almost, in some way Eli could not quite explain, like the sounds of children who had finally been found. He stayed with them until the tray was empty. Then he picked it up, stood slowly and looked down at the three of them. They looked back at him. The largest one blinked. The smallest one let out a long breath and sat down heavily, its little belly finally full. Eli nodded once, like a decision had been made. He turned and walked back toward the mess hall to get more food. He did not ask himself why. He did not think about the regulations, the paperwork, the questions that would come if anyone found out. He did not think about any of that. They were hungry. That was enough. Eli did not sleep well that night. He lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling, listening to the station hum around him, thinking about three small creatures in a dark cargo bay scraping at empty food containers. He thought about the smallest one, the silver-white hatchling, the way it had walked toward the tray on unsteady legs like it was running out of time. He thought about how all three of them had pressed together over the food and eaten without stopping, without even lifting their heads. He was back at Bay 17 before his shift started. He brought more this time. 2 full trays of soft protein mix, a container of warm grain broth, and a small portion of dried meat strips that the Draconi traders who passed through the station always seemed to favor. He had also stopped by the medical supply closet on Deck 4, the small one near the cargo processing office that most people forgot existed. He had taken a basic field kit, antiseptic solution, soft bandaging wrap, a tube of healing gel that worked across most known biological types. He had signed it out under routine maintenance, which was not exactly accurate, but it was not exactly a lie either. He pushed open the bay door and stepped inside. They were in the same corner. Same cluster of containers, same dim orange light along the far wall. But this time they were not going through the garbage. They were just sitting together, quiet and still, and when the door opened all three heads turned toward him at the same time. The largest hatchling made a low sound. Not a hiss. Something shorter, less sharp. Eli raised one hand slowly, the way he had the night before, and crouched down. He set the trays on the floor and pushed them forward. This time they did not wait as long. The middle hatchling came forward first, moving with more energy than it had shown the previous night. It reached the tray and started eating immediately, pulling pieces of meat strip apart with small careful claws. The largest followed, settling on the other side of the tray with a kind of quiet authority, eating steadily. The smallest one came last, still moving a little slowly, but its eyes were clearer than the night before. Less glassy. More present. Eli watched them eat and felt the tight thing in his chest loosen slightly. When the first tray was mostly gone, he slid the second one forward. While they ate, he opened the medical kit and laid the contents out on the floor beside him, moving slowly and without any sudden motion. He had noticed the night before that the middle hatchling's left wing was not sitting right. It was folded against its back like the others, but the angle was slightly wrong, and once or twice he had seen it shift and flinch when it moved too quickly. He needed to get a closer look. He waited until the middle hatchling had eaten its fill and stepped back from the tray. Then he held out his hand, palm up, flat and open, with a small piece of dried meat resting in the center. The middle hatchling looked at his hand. It looked at his face. It looked at his hand again. It stepped forward and took the piece of meat from his palm. Eli kept his hand still. He let the hatchling eat. Then he placed another small piece on his palm and held it out again. The hatchling came forward again. This time it stayed a half-second longer before stepping back, and Eli used that half-second to look carefully at the wing. The injury was along the lower membrane, close to where the wing met the body. The membrane had a tear in it, not large but not small either, and the edges of the tear were dark and slightly swollen. It needed to be cleaned. If it was not treated, it would get worse, and on a growing hatchling, a wing injury left untreated could become a permanent problem. Eli picked up the antiseptic solution and the soft bandaging wrap. He placed another piece of meat on his palm and held it out. The middle hatchling came forward. As it ate, Eli moved his other hand very slowly, very carefully toward the injured wing. The hatchling flinched and pulled back. Eli stopped immediately and did not move. He waited. He held out another piece of meat. It took a long time. Longer than he expected. He stayed crouched on the cold floor without shifting his position, offering food, waiting, letting the hatchling set the pace of everything. The largest one watched from nearby, alert but not aggressive. The smallest one had come closer too, settling just at the edge of the light, watching Eli with calm and curious eyes. Eventually the middle hatchling allowed him close enough. He cleaned the wound as gently as he could, using the smallest amount of antiseptic solution, touching only what needed to be touched. The hatchling made a sharp sound when the solution made contact with the damaged membrane and pulled away hard. Eli stopped, waited, offered more food, started again. By the time he had applied the healing gel and wrapped the wing lightly with the soft bandage, his knees ached from crouching and his back was stiff, but the job was done. The middle hatchling shook its head once, looked at the bandage, looked at Eli, and then made a sound he had not heard from them before. It was low and rhythmic, almost a vibration more than a sound, coming from somewhere deep in its chest. Eli did not know what it meant. But it did not sound like distress. The smallest hatchling chose that moment to walk directly up to him and sit down against his left knee. Eli looked down at it. It looked up at him. Then it made the same low rhythmic sound the middle one had made, settled its small head against his leg and closed its eyes. He sat there on the floor of the cargo bay, one hatchling leaning against his knee, the other two within arm's reach, and he felt something he had not expected to feel in a place like this. Something quiet and warm and completely out of place on a deep space cargo station. He reached down slowly and rested two fingers very gently on top of the smallest hatchling's head. It did not move away. He stayed like that for a long time, not speaking, barely breathing, listening to the soft sounds they made. After a while he began talking quietly, not saying anything important, just low steady words about nothing in particular. The station, the cargo routes, a river back on Earth that he used to fish in when he was young. He did not know if they could understand any of it. He did not think they could. But they seemed to respond to the sound of his voice the way most young creatures responded to calm, consistent sound. Their bodies relaxed. Their breathing slowed. The largest one eventually moved closer and settled on the floor a short distance away, watching him with half-closed amber eyes. Eli smiled. Then the smallest hatchling lifted its head. It was not looking at Eli. It was looking past him, toward the far end of the bay, toward the deep dark space behind the tallest stack of cargo containers where the emergency lighting did not reach at all. Its nostrils were moving. Its body had gone very still in a specific way, not frightened still but aware still, the way young animals go still when they sense something familiar. The middle hatchling looked in the same direction. Then the largest one. All three of them looking at the same point in the darkness. Quiet. Come. Waiting. Eli turned around slowly. He could not see anything at first. Just the dark shapes of stacked containers and the black space between them and the wall. He stared into that darkness and saw nothing, and for a moment he thought he had imagined it, thought the hatchlings were simply reacting to some sound he could not hear or some smell from the ventilation system. Then he saw the eyes. They were high up. Much higher than they should have been for anything standing on the floor of the bay. 2 points of amber light, steady and unblinking, catching the faint orange glow of the emergency strip from a great distance away. They did not move. They did not blink. They simply watched him from the dark with a stillness that was not the stillness of something that had not noticed him. It was the stillness of something that had been watching him for a very long time. Eli's body understood the situation before his mind caught up. Every instinct he had, every old and deep and biological alarm that human beings carried in their bones from a million years of being small creatures in a world full of large ones, fired at the same moment. He froze. The eyes in the darkness did not move. And slowly, in the dim orange light, the shape behind them became visible. Massive. Scale. Scarred across the neck and shoulder in pale white lines that crossed each other like the memory of old battles. A mother. Her eyes fixed on him with an expression he could not read and did not need to. She had been there the whole time. Nobody moved. Eli stayed exactly where he was, crouched on the cold floor of the cargo bay with his hands visible and his body completely still. The mother dragon stood in the deep shadow at the far end of the bay and watched him with those steady amber eyes that caught the orange emergency light like 2 small flames burning in the dark. She had not moved since he had seen her. She was not growling. She was not spreading her wings or lowering her head into an attack position. She was simply standing there, looking at him, and that stillness was somehow more frightening than any noise she could have made. Eli understood, in a very clear and simple way, that he was entirely at her mercy. She was enormous. Even partially hidden by shadow he could see the scale of her. Her head alone was larger than his entire upper body. The scarring on her neck and shoulder was visible even in the low light, pale lines crossing each other in patterns that spoke of something violent and survived. Her wings were folded tight against her back, but the edges of them brushed the cargo containers on either side of her, and those containers were not small. He did not run. Running would be the worst possible thing he could do. He stayed crouched and kept his hands open and visible and breathed as steadily as he could manage. The smallest hatchling, still pressed against his knee, made a short soft sound. Not a warning sound. Something familiar. The kind of sound a small creature makes when it wants the large creature it belongs to know that everything is acceptable. That the strange thing nearby is not a threat. The mother's eyes moved to the hatchling. Then back to Eli. A long moment passed. Then she stepped forward out of the shadow. She moved slowly and with a slight unevenness that Eli noticed immediately. Her left side dipped fractionally with each step, just enough to be visible to someone watching carefully. She crossed the floor of the bay without making almost any sound, which should not have been possible for something her size, and stopped about 4 body lengths away from him. Close enough that he could now see the full detail of her face. The heavy ridged brow. The wide flat nostrils that were moving steadily, reading the air around him. The jaw that could have closed around him without effort. She lowered her head slightly and looked at him directly. Eli looked back at her. He did the only thing he could think to do. He placed one hand flat on the floor in front of him, palm down, and bowed his head slowly toward it. He had seen Draconi trading crew members use a version of that gesture with each other when acknowledging someone of significantly higher standing. He was not sure if he was doing it correctly. He was not sure if it meant the same thing coming from a human. But it was the only thing he had. When he raised his head again, something in her expression had changed. Just slightly. Just enough. She made a sound. Low and complex, with layers to it that his ears could not fully separate. It was not trade tongue. It was full Draconi speech and he did not understand it. He shook his head slowly and said carefully in trade tongue, the simplified shared language used across most of the sector species, "I do not speak your language. I know only trade tongue. A little." She was quiet for a moment. Then, in trade tongue that was rough and unpracticed but completely understandable, she said, "Why?" Just that one word. Eli knew what she was asking. Not why was he here, not why had he come back, but the larger question underneath all of it. Why had he fed her children? Why had he treated the injured wing? Why had a human cargo officer been sitting on the floor of an abandoned bay in the dark, letting her hatchlings sleep against his leg? He thought about how to answer that honestly in simple words across a language neither of them owned natively. "They were hungry," he said. "I had food." She looked at him for a long time. "That is all," she said. Not a question. Flat. Like she was testing the shape of the answer. "That is all," he said. Another silence. The hatchlings were very quiet, watching their mother, watching Eli, staying still in the way young creatures stay still when they understand that the adults around them are deciding something important. The mother straightened slightly and Eli saw it again, that small dip on her left side, that fractional unevenness. And now that she was closer and the light was slightly better, he could see something else. Low on her left flank, below the fold of her wing where the shadow of her own body had been hiding it, there was a darkness in the scaling that was not natural coloring. It was too deep, too concentrated, spreading in a shape that he recognized from years of working in places where injuries happened and people tried to keep working through them. She was wounded. Seriously. He did not say anything immediately. He looked at her face instead of the wound, because he understood instinctively that pointing at it directly would be the wrong move. He had already seen enough of how she carried herself to know that this was not a creature that would welcome her weakness being named out loud. "How long have you been on this station?" he asked. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Long enough." "Where is your clan ship?" Pause. Something moved behind her eyes that was not quite pain but was close to it. "Gone," she said. "We were separated. There was an attack on our fleet route. I pulled away to protect the hatchlings. I could not get back." She stopped. "The hatchlings could not survive open travel in my condition. I found this place. The door was not locked." Eli nodded slowly. He did not ask about the attack. He did not ask who had done it or what had happened to the rest of the fleet. Those questions were not his to ask. "How long have you been hurt?" he said instead. Her chin lifted. "I am not." "You favor your left side when you walk," he said, keeping his voice completely even. "The wound is below your left wing. You have been hiding it since you came in here." The silence that followed was very different from the ones before it. It had a weight to it. She looked at him with an expression that was complicated in ways he could not fully read, and he understood that he had just done something that very few people probably did to a draconi of her size and standing. He had said a true thing she did not want said. He waited to see how that would land. She did not speak for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "It is not your concern." "No," he agreed. "It is not." He reached beside him and picked up the medical kit. He held it up so she could see it clearly. "But I have this. And I used it on your hatchling's wing last night. And I am offering to use it on you now. I do not need. If it gets worse you will not be able to protect them," Eli said. Still even. Still quiet. "Not because you are weak. Because infections do not care how strong you are." The word he had used, infections, took her a moment to translate. When she had it, her eyes dropped briefly to her own flank. Just for a second. Then back to him. The largest hatchling walked over to its mother and pressed its head against her front leg. She looked down at it. The smallest one, still near Eli, made the low rhythmic sound again, the same one it had made after he treated the middle hatchling's wing. Verith, he did not know her name yet, that would come later, looked at her smallest hatchling sitting calmly against the leg of a human. She looked at the bandaging on the middle one's wing, clean and carefully done. She looked at Eli, sitting on the floor with a medical kit in his hands and no weapon and no backup and no reason to be here except the one he had already given her. She lowered herself slowly to the floor on her right side, keeping her left flank accessible, and looked away from him toward the far wall. She did not say yes. She did not need to. Eli moved forward carefully and got to work. He did not rush. He did not speak unless he needed to. When the antiseptic reached the deeper tissue and she pulled in a sharp breath through her teeth, he stopped, waited, and continued only when her body settled again. The wound was worse than he had expected, deep, showing signs of early infection, the kind of thing that would have become dangerous within another few days. He worked for a long time. When it was done he sat back and looked at what he had managed. It was not a medical bay. It was not a proper treatment. But it was clean, properly sealed, and medicated as well as the kit allowed. He looked up and found her watching him over her shoulder. "Verith," she said quietly. Her name. Eli nodded once. "Eli," he said. She turned her head back toward the wall. But the hatchlings were already settling around them both, small bodies finding warm spaces, the cargo bay filling with the soft low sound of 3 young creatures who had, for the first time in a long time, gone to sleep feeling safe. 4 days passed. Eli had developed a routine the way he always did with things that mattered to him. He came to Bay 17 twice a day, once before his shift started in the early morning cycle, and once after it ended in the late evening. He brought food every time. He brought fresh medical supplies every other day to check on Veritha's wound and the middle hatchling's wing. He signed everything out carefully, spreading the withdrawals across different supply logs, different item categories, different timestamps. He was not trying to steal. He was trying not to be noticed. He was not sure how much longer that would work. But for now the routine held. And within that routine, something else had started to grow. The hatchlings had decided, completely and without any apparent doubt, that Eli belonged to them. It had started with the smallest one, the silver-white hatchling he had privately started thinking of as Frost. Frost had claimed him on the second night, pressing against his leg the way it had done the first time, and had simply never stopped. Now, every time Eli came through the bay door, Frost was the first one moving, crossing the floor in that slightly uneven trot, making the low rhythmic chest sound before Eli had even set down the food. The middle one, the sand-colored hatchling with the healing wing who Eli thought of as Sand, had taken a little longer. But by the third day Sand had started following him around the bay while he moved, watching everything he did with focused amber eyes, mimicking his hand gestures when he set out the food trays, making a short clicking sound every time he looked over and made eye contact. The largest hatchling, the gray-green one he called Slate in his own head, maintained a careful dignity that Eli respected. Slate did not rush to him when he arrived. Slate watched from a measured distance, ate when the food was offered, and allowed Eli nearby without any sign of tension. But on the fourth evening, when Eli sat down against the wall to rest for a moment before leaving, Slate walked over and settled on the floor directly beside him, close enough that their sides were almost touching, and stayed there for a full hour without moving. Eli did not comment on it. He just sat there and let it happen. Vareth watched all of this. She was healing. The wound on her flank was responding well. The deep infection had not spread further, the tissue was closing, and she was moving with less of that uneven dip in her step each day. She still spent most of her time in the back of the bay, in the shadow near the far wall, but she no longer positioned herself as far from Eli as the space allowed. She had moved forward, gradually, over the course of those 4 days. Not dramatically. Just a little closer each time, in the way that wary creatures move toward things they are still deciding about. She watched him with her hatchlings and she did not speak for a long time about what she saw. Then on the fifth evening she asked him a question. Eli had finished the food distribution and was sitting on the floor with Frost pressed against his left side and Sand carefully inspecting the contents of his jacket pocket with one small claw. Vareth was closer than usual, settled about 2 body lengths away, her head resting on her folded forelegs. "You do this for nothing," she said. In trade tongue, slow and deliberate. Eli looked over at her. "I do it for them," he said. "They are not yours. No. You have no debt to us. No agreement. No payment." She paused. "In what way does this make sense for you?" Eli thought about that for a moment. It was a fair question. From a Draconi perspective, from almost any perspective in this part of the galaxy, honestly, what he was doing had no logical framework. He was spending his own resources, risking his position, losing sleep, and receiving nothing in return from people who had no claim on him and no way to repay him. "It makes sense to me because they needed help," he said. "And I could give it." Varetha's eyes stayed on him. "That is not an answer. That is a description of events." He almost smiled at that. She was sharp. Even in a second language, even recovering from a serious wound, she was precise. "My species almost did not survive," he said. He kept his voice simple and even, picking words she would know in trade tongue. "A long time ago on our home world we were very good at hurting each other. We built things that could destroy everything. We came very close to using them. There were wars that killed so many people that whole parts of our history are just empty. Just loss." Vareth said nothing. She was listening. "What stopped it," Eli continued, "was not strength. It was not one group winning and taking control. It was people choosing over and over, in small ways and large ways, to help someone they did not have to help. A neighbor. A stranger. An enemy sometimes. It was not natural for us. It did not come easily. But the ones who kept choosing it, they kept more people alive. And those people built things. And those things kept more people alive." He paused. "It went slowly. It is still going. We still get it wrong all the time. But that choice, caring for someone even when it cost you something, that is the thing that kept us here." The bay was quiet. Even Sand had stopped investigating his pocket and was sitting still, as if the hatchling somehow understood the weight of what was being said even without the language. Vareth was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Draconi remember strength. The strong protect the clan. The weak are carried until they are strong. But a stranger," she paused. "A stranger's weakness is not your problem. That is the rule." "I know," Eli said. "Different rule. You think your rule is better." He considered that carefully. "I think our rule kept us alive when nothing else would have," he said. "I do not know if it is better. I know it is ours." Vareth looked at him for another long moment. Then she looked at Frost, small and silver-white, pressed comfortably against the side of a human cargo officer in an abandoned bay on a space station. Something moved behind her eyes. Not agreement exactly, but something close to understanding. She did not say anything more that evening. But the next morning when Eli arrived, she was sitting closer to the front of the bay than she had ever been before. It was on that same morning that Eli noticed the memo. It had come through on his work data pad, flagged routine, buried between a cargo manifest update and a shift schedule change. A notice from station security. Supply discrepancies had been identified across 3 separate storage areas on decks 3 and 4. The amounts were not large individually, but the pattern had been flagged by the station's automated inventory system as consistent and ongoing. A formal audit had been opened. All logistics staff were reminded to ensure proper documentation of any supply withdrawals. Eli read it twice. Then he set the data pad down and sat very still for a moment. He had been careful. He had genuinely been careful, spreading the withdrawals, varying the logs. But he had underestimated the automated system. It did not think like a person. It did not look at each withdrawal separately and decide whether it was reasonable. It looked at patterns. And patterns were exactly what he had created. Commander Torvak's name was at the bottom of the memo as the authorizing officer for the audit. Eli knew Torvak. Everyone on the station knew Torvak. He was a Eurelian, tall and gray-skinned and deeply uninterested in bending rules for any reason anyone had ever offered him. He ran station security the way a closed fist held something, completely without gaps. If Torvak ran the audit personally, he would find the pattern. And if he followed the pattern, it would lead him to the supply types, food, medical materials, and the quantities and the frequency. And a good security officer, which Torvak absolutely was, would start asking where those supplies were going. Eli looked around the bay. At Vareth healing but not healed. At Frost sleeping in a warm corner. At Sand and Slate eating quietly from the morning tray. Yet maybe a few days. A week if he was lucky. He needed to think. He picked up the data pad again and stared at the memo, turning the problem over in his mind from every angle he could find. There was no clean solution. There was no way to make this disappear. Whatever was coming, it was going to arrive whether he was ready or not. The only question was what he would do when it did. Frost woke up, looked across the bay at him, and made the low rhythmic chest sound. Eli looked back at the smallest hatchling for a long moment. Then he put the data pad in his pocket and went to get the morning's second food tray. Whatever came next, they still needed to eat today. It happened on a Thursday. Eli had known it was coming. He had felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm, not seeing it yet but knowing in your bones that the atmosphere has shifted and something is about to break open. He had spent the last 2 days quietly preparing, reviewing the interspecies welfare clause on his personal data pad late at night in his bunk, reading every line of it 3 times, memorizing the exact wording that mattered. He had found it buried deep in the station's legal framework document, Section 47, Subclause 9, rarely referenced and almost never used. But it was there. It was real. And it was the only thing he had. He had also started talking to Vareth about what might happen. She had not liked it. If they come, she had said on the evening before, her trade tongue sharper now after days of practice. I will not hide. I am not asking you to hide, Eli had told her. I am asking you to let me speak first. Whatever happens when that door opens, let me speak first. She had looked at him for a long time. You are asking me to stand behind a human while he talks. I am asking you to give me 30 seconds before you do anything else. Another long look. Then, reluctantly, the smallest tilt of her great head that he had come to understand meant yes. He had hoped he would have more time. He did not have more time. He was in the bay on Thursday morning, watching Sand attempt to climb the side of a cargo container with moderate success, when he heard the boots. Not one set. Multiple. Moving in the coordinated pattern of people who have been told to approach a specific location with a specific purpose. Eli stood up immediately. He turned to Vareth, who was already on her feet, already alert, her eyes on the door. Let me speak first, he said quietly. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were hard. But she moved, not back into the shadow, she was past that now, but to the side, positioning herself near the far wall with the 3 hatchlings pressed close around her feet. The door opened hard. Commander Torvak came in first, and he came in the way he did everything, completely, with full authority and zero hesitation. He was tall even for a Eurelian, gray-skinned, with the flat wide eyes of his species that could see nearly full circle without moving his head. Behind him came 2 station security officers, both human, both with their pulse weapons already drawn and held low. Behind them a 4th figure, a junior analyst with a data pad who stepped inside and then immediately stopped moving when he saw what was in the bay. Torvak also stopped. For exactly 2 seconds, the commander of Waypoint Station Kairos Security stood in the doorway of Bay 17 and looked at a full-grown Draconi female standing against the far wall with 3 hatchlings at her feet, and said absolutely nothing. Then his eyes moved to Eli. "Sergeant Voss," he said. His voice was completely level in the way that very controlled people get very level when they are working hard to stay that way. "Commander Torvak," Eli said. "Step away from the Draconi." "I would rather not do that, sir." The 2 security officers behind Torvak raised their weapons. Not pointing directly yet, but up, ready, the body language of people who have just recalculated the danger level of the room they walked into. Behind Eli, Vareth made a sound so low it was almost below hearing, a vibration more than a sound, and he felt it in his chest like a second heartbeat. "Sergeant." Torvak's voice dropped half a degree in temperature. "This is not a request." "I understand that, sir." Eli did not move. He kept his hands visible, open at his sides, and he kept his voice as steady as he could make it. "And I am not refusing your authority. I am asking for 30 seconds to speak before this situation develops in a direction that will be difficult for everyone in this room." Torvak looked at him with those wide flat eyes. "You have been stealing station supplies." "I have been using station supplies without proper authorization. I signed them out. I did not hide them. I was managing the documentation poorly, not concealing it." "That distinction will not save your position, Sergeant." "I know that, sir. I am not trying to save my position." Eli took a slow breath. "I am trying to invoke Section 47, Subclause 9 of the Waypoint Station Operating Charter. The Interspecies Welfare Clause." A silence. The junior analyst behind Torvak looked up from his data pad with an expression of genuine surprise. One of the security officers glanced sideways at the other. Torvak himself did not change his expression at all, but something behind his flat wide eyes shifted. The look of a man who had just heard something he had not expected and was now rapidly calculating what it meant. "You have memorized station charter subclauses?" Torvak said. "I had a few evenings free, sir." "Explain your invocation." Eli kept his voice clear and simple. "The Interspecies Welfare Clause allows any station crew member to request emergency provisional shelter for non-registered beings found on station grounds, if those beings can be demonstrated to be in a condition of medical distress or survival need at the time of discovery. The clause requires the station commander to grant a minimum of 72 hours of provisional protected status while formal review is conducted." He paused. "Vareth, the adult Draconi, was found on this station with a serious infected wound and 3 hatchlings who were starving. That condition meets the definition of survival need. I am formally requesting provisional protected status under that clause, effective from the time of first discovery, which I can document." Torvak was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That clause was written for small biological entities. Injured animals. Refugee cases involving non-combatant civilians. It was written for beings in survival need found on station grounds, sir. The clause does not specify size. It does not specify species. The legal language is broad. You are interpreting it broadly. I am reading it as written." Another silence. Longer this time. Torvak turned his head slightly toward his junior analyst. The analyst was already working on his data pad, pulling up the charter document, scrolling fast. After a moment he found the section. His eyes moved across it. He looked up at Torvak and gave a single small nod. The weapons had not lowered. Vareth had not moved. The hatchlings were pressed against her, completely still, and Eli was aware without looking that Frost was probably staring at him with those clear amber eyes and he could not afford to look back right now. Torvak looked at the analyst. He looked at the security officers. He looked at Eli. Then he looked past Eli at Vareth, long and direct, the look of a commander assessing a variable he had not planned for. Vareth met his gaze without blinking. Torvak said, "Lower your weapons." The officers hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then they lowered. Torvak took 3 steps into the bay, moving slowly and without any sudden motion, stopping at a distance that was respectful without being fearful. He looked at Vareth directly and spoke in trade tongue, clearly and formally. "You are being granted provisional protected status on this station for a period of 72 hours under emergency welfare provision. During this time you will not be detained, relocated, or separated from your young. At the end of this period a formal review will determine next steps." He paused. "Do you understand?" Vareth looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Yes." Torvak turned back to Eli. The temperature in his voice had not warmed. "You will report to my office after your shift, Sergeant. There will be a formal review of your conduct and your supply usage. You will bring complete documentation." "Yes, sir." "This is not resolved. 72 hours is not a solution." "I know, sir. I only needed it to be a start." Torvak looked at him for another moment with an expression that was difficult to read. It was not respect exactly. It was not approval. It was the look of someone who had just watched another person do something unexpected and was still in the process of deciding what to make of it. Then he turned and walked out of the bay, the analyst and one security officer following. The second officer paused at the door, looked back once at the scene. The large dragon against the wall, the three hatchlings, the single human sergeant standing between them and the door with his hands open at his sides, and then walked out without saying anything. The door closed. Eli let out a long, slow breath. His hands were shaking slightly, which he had not noticed until just now. He pressed them flat against his legs and stood still for a moment. Then he heard a sound behind him. He turned around. Vareth was looking at him. Not with the evaluating look she had given him in the first days, not with the careful measuring expression he had come to know well. This was different. It was quieter than that. Deeper. The look of someone who has just watched something happen that they did not know was possible and are not yet sure how to hold it. Frost left her side and crossed the floor and pressed hard against Eli's leg. Eli reached down and rested his hand on the small silver head. He did not say anything. There was nothing that needed to be said. Outside, the station hummed on around them, indifferent and steady, while 72 hours began to count down. Eli did not sleep for the first 20 hours. He sat at his workstation in the small logistics office on Deck 2 with 3 different communication terminals open and a cold cup of coffee that he kept forgetting to drink. The 72-hour window was not a gift. It was a deadline. And Eli had spent enough years managing cargo schedules to understand the difference between time you had and time you were borrowing. He started with the Draconi Trade Registry. Every clan fleet that operated in the sector was required to log their general route corridor with the Regional Trade Authority, not precise coordinates, but a corridor, a range, a general sweep of space they moved through on a regular basis. He pulled every registered Draconi fleet corridor that passed within reasonable distance of Kairos and started cross-referencing with recent signal traffic in those corridors. There were 9 fleets in the relevant range. He sent a careful message to each one. Not detailed. Not emotional. Simple and direct. A neutral inquiry asking if any fleet was missing a female and 3 hatchlings, and if so to please make contact with Waypoint Station Kairos Logistics at their earliest availability. He signed it with his name and his station ID and sent it through the standard trade communication channel that all registered fleets monitored. Then he waited. Most of the first day passed without a response. He ran his regular shift, filed his supply documentation for Torvak's review, and answered questions from the formal conduct inquiry with complete honesty. He did not apologize for what he had done. He explained it clearly and without decoration and let the facts sit where they were. Torvak listened to everything without expression and dismissed him without indicating what the outcome would be. Eli went back to his workstation and kept watching the communication terminal. The response came at hour 31. It was short. A single line in trade tongue from a vessel identifying itself as the Clan Vareth command ship. It said, "We are coming. Do not let her be taken." Eli read it twice. Then he sent back one line of his own. "She is protected. Come quickly." The clan ship arrived at hour 47, sliding into the station's outer docking range with the quiet precision of a vessel that had been traveling hard and fast. It was large, much larger than the standard Draconi merchant vessels that Eli was used to seeing at the cargo docks. Dark-hulled, with the clan markings running along its side in deep red lines that were visible even at distance on the station's external camera feeds. It did not request a standard docking berth. It held position at the outer range and sent a single shuttle across. Eli met it at the docking port. 3 Draconi came off the shuttle. 2 were large and clearly security, moving with the quiet readiness of people who had not decided yet whether this was a rescue or something else. The third was older. Smaller than Vareth, more slightly built, but with a stillness about him that had nothing to do with size. His scaling was deep gray, almost black at the edges, and the markings on his neck were elaborate and old. His amber eyes moved across Eli with a slow, complete assessment that lasted only a few seconds but felt much longer. This was the elder. Eli had expected that. He introduced himself in trade tongue, clearly and formally, and offered to take them to Vareth. The elder said nothing. He simply gestured once with one hand, a short, downward motion, and waited for Eli to lead. The walk to Bay 17 was quiet. Eli opened the door and stood aside. Vareth was on her feet. She had known they were coming. Eli had told her as soon as the response arrived, and she had spent the intervening hours in a stillness that was different from her usual quiet. It was the stillness of someone preparing for something they were not sure they could face. The hatchlings were close around her, sensing her tension, subdued in a way they had not been in days. The elder stepped into the bay. For a moment the two Draconi simply looked at each other across the space, and Eli, standing near the door, felt the weight of something passing between them that he had no complete access to: history, relationship, the specific texture of whatever had existed between them before the ambush and the separation and everything that had come after. The elder spoke in full Draconi. Eli could not follow the words, but the tone was clear enough. Formal. Measured. And underneath the formality, something that was close to disappointment. He was looking at Vareth the way someone looks when they had hoped not to find what they have found. Vareth let him finish. Then she spoke. She spoke in full Draconi too, and Eli stood near the door and understood none of the words and watched everything else instead. She did not drop her head. She did not take the posture of someone accepting judgment. She stood straight, wounded side and all, and she spoke directly to the elder with her eyes level and her voice steady, and she did not stop for a long time. Eli watched the elder's face change. It was subtle. The Draconi did not emote the way humans did not wear their feelings openly on faces built for something other than that kind of expression. But he had spent enough days in this bay watching Vareth, learning to read the small signals, the shift of the jaw, the angle of the brow ridge, the particular quality of stillness that meant something different from another quality of stillness, that he had learned to see what was there. The elder had come in carrying certainty. He was leaving it somewhere on the floor of the bay, piece by piece, as Vareth spoke. She pointed at the area near the cargo containers where the hatchlings had been found. She pointed at Eli. She held out the middle hatchling's wing, healed now, the membrane clean and uninfected, the scar of the tear small and fading, and said something that needed no translation because the elder leaned forward to look at it with his own eyes. She showed him her own flank, the healing wound, the clean closure of it. She said something else and pointed at Eli again. Then she described the door. Eli understood that much from her gesture. The moment the security officers had come through, the weapons, the line of human beings with authority and armaments on one side and her family on the other. She moved her hand in a flat horizontal gesture between them. And she pointed at Eli, standing in that middle space. The elder turned and looked at Eli directly for the first time since entering the bay. Eli met his gaze and said nothing. This was not his moment to speak. The elder turned back to Vareth and asked something. One question, short and direct. Vareth answered it in 4 words. The elder was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something to the 2 security Draconi behind him. They moved to the sides of the bay, relaxed, no longer in the posture of readiness. The elder turned fully toward Eli and crossed the bay toward him with slow and deliberate steps. Eli stayed still. The elder stopped in front of him and studied him the way someone studies a thing they are revising their understanding of in real time. Then he reached out and placed one large hand, carefully with intention, flat against Eli's chest, over his heart. He spoke 3 words in Draconi. Eli looked at Vareth. Vareth was looking at him with an expression he had never seen on her before. Something that was open in a way her face had not been open until this moment. Her voice, when she translated, was very quiet. "Clanmark," she said. "He names you kin." Eli did not speak for a moment. He was not sure he could. The elder removed his hand and stepped back and said something else, and Vareth translated again. "It is not given to outsiders. It has not been given to a non-Draconian longer than I have been alive. He says," she paused. "He says that the clan does not forget what it owes. And you are owed." Before Eli could respond, the hatchlings broke. All 3 of them came at him at once. Frost first, then sand, then slate, abandoning its careful dignity entirely, and the combined small weight of 3 young Draconi hit him at knee level and nearly knocked him over. He caught himself against the wall and looked down at the 3 of them pressing against his legs and making the low rhythmic chest sound all at once, and he laughed. It came out of him without warning, genuine and full, and it echoed in the cargo bay in a way that made even the elder's expression shift into something that might, in the right light, have been called a smile. The leave-taking was quiet. Vareth's wound was stable enough for travel. The elder's ship had a medical bay that could complete what Eli had started. There was no reason to stay. Eli helped carry the hatchlings to the shuttle, which they did not actually need help with but which they seemed to want from him anyway. He said goodbye to each of them in the simple way he did most things, without large words, just presence and steadiness and a hand resting briefly on each small head. Vareth was last. She stood in the shuttle dock entrance and looked at him for a moment. Then she said in trade tongue, slowly and clearly, "Draconi remember strength." Pause. "Now we remember something else also." She stepped onto the shuttle. Eli stood in the dock and watched the shuttle detach and cross the dark space back to the clan ship. He watched the clan ship's running lights shift as it turned, slowly and with great unhurried weight, toward open space. He was still standing there when the smallest face appeared at the viewport. Silver-white, round-eyed, pressing a small blunt snout against the glass from the inside. Eli walked forward until he was as close as the dock barrier allowed. He raised his hand and pressed his palm flat against the air between them as the ship moved away, as the distance grew, as the running lights became smaller and the dark between stars filled in around them. He held his hand there until the ship was gone. The station hummed around him, steady and indifferent the way it always was, carrying on without comment the way stations do. Eli lowered his hand. He stood there for a little while longer in the quiet, in the dark, in the vast ordinary space where something extraordinary had passed through and left its mark on him in a language older than words. Then he picked up his data pad, turned around and went back to work.